Charlotte Motor Speedway felt different this weekend from the very first moment the gates opened. You could feel it walking through the garage. You could feel it in the stands. You could feel it in the unusual quiet that hung over the entire speedway before engines even fired up for the Coca-Cola 600. Everybody there knew they were part of something the sport is not going to move past easily or quickly. And then, before the race even started, one small moment on pit road ignited a debate that completely took over NASCAR's social media and divided fans everywhere. Welcome to NASCAR Wire Report. Here is everything you need to understand about what really happened, and why most of the people arguing online were missing the entire point. Before the green flag dropped on the Coca-Cola 600, Bubba Wallace walked to a painted number 8 tribute on pit road. He knelt down beside it. He stayed there quietly for a few seconds. He did not call cameras over. He did not make a speech. He did not try to turn the moment into something public or dramatic. He simply paid his respects privately, stood up, and walked away. That was it. And almost immediately, the internet caught fire. Some fans saw exactly what it was. A driver grieving privately, honoring someone who genuinely mattered to him, taking a personal moment before one of the most emotional races the sport had ever staged. But another group of people online started accusing Wallace of making the tribute about himself, of seeking attention, of performing grief rather than feeling it. That criticism spread fast. It dominated NASCAR conversations for a significant stretch of the weekend. And the reason it spread so quickly is because most of the people reacting had no idea about the actual history between Bubba Wallace and Kyle Busch. Here is the context that changes everything. Kyle Busch was not just another competitor to Bubba Wallace. Kyle Busch helped change the trajectory of Bubba Wallace's career at one of the most critical moments in his development as a driver. A lot of fans who follow NASCAR, primarily through the Cup Series, know Bubba Wallace from 23XI Racing, the team co-owned by Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan. But long before that, Wallace was a young driver trying to establish himself in the NASCAR Truck Series, searching for equipment and opportunities at the level where careers are either made or ended before they fully begin. Busch Motorsports gave him that opportunity. Kyle Busch believed in Bubba Wallace early. Wallace drove for KBM and earned his first Truck Series victory under Kyle Busch's ownership. That win was not just a result, it was a statement. It was proof that Wallace belonged. It gave him visibility, confidence, and credibility at a stage of his career when all three of those things were absolutely essential. At a time when Wallace was still fighting to prove himself worthy of top-level NASCAR competition, Kyle Busch handed him equipment and backed him to compete for wins. That relationship ran deep inside the garage long before Bubba Wallace became one of the most discussed drivers in the sport. That is the history behind that moment on pit road. That is why people who actually know this sport understood immediately what they were watching. One veteran crew member who was present at Charlotte this weekend reportedly said it simply: Kyle Busch changed lives in this garage. And that one line tells you more about why Bubba Wallace knelt beside that number 8 than anything trending on social media ever could. The broader emotions of the weekend extended well beyond that single moment. Samantha Busch was present throughout the weekend alongside Brexton and Lennox. Seeing her there, composed, dignified, carrying an unimaginable weight, hit the entire garage hard. You could see it on drivers' faces. You could see it in how crew members moved and spoke differently around the paddock. This was not an abstract loss. This was personal. This was family grieving in public. While an entire sport tried to figure out how to support them, Kurt Busch was seen laying flowers near the tribute area for his brother. That image stopped a lot of longtime NASCAR fans cold. Kurt has his own complicated NASCAR history. Injuries, forced retirement, watching from the sidelines while his younger brother kept racing. And now this. Seeing Kurt there in quiet reflection said everything about the magnitude of what the Busch family and the entire NASCAR garage was carrying into that race. Then the race itself delivered one more emotional moment that the sport needed. Daniel Suarez won the Coca-Cola 600, and the first thing he did in victory lane was dedicate the win to Kyle Busch. Suarez called him one of the most influential drivers of his generation, and that was not a polished post-race talking point. That was genuine, because whether you loved Kyle Busch or spent years hoping someone would finally beat him on a Sunday, His influence on everyone who raced against him, worked alongside him, or learned from him was undeniable and real. The impact of Kyle Busch Motorsports alone is something the sport is going to be reckoning with for a long time. Think about how many drivers passed through that organization. How many careers were shaped by having quality equipment and Kyle Busch's demanding standards pushing them to compete at their absolute ceiling. Bubba Wallace is one of the most visible examples, but he is far from the only one. Drivers across the Cup Series, the Xfinity Series, and the Truck Series today can trace some part of their development back to opportunities or competition that came through Kyle Busch and the organizations he built and drove for. That is the real legacy conversation that the garage was having this weekend, not the social media arguments about whether one driver's tribute was genuine. The people who actually live inside NASCAR were focused on grief, on respect, on gratitude, and on the complex and very human experience of losing someone who changed the sport while they were still in the middle of racing against him. There is also something worth saying about what the Bubba Wallace controversy reveals about the culture surrounding modern sports in general. Every emotional moment now gets dissected instantly online. Intentions get assigned before context is understood. Reactions happen before people stop long enough to think about the human reality of what they are actually watching. The gap between what something looks like on a 15-second clip and what it actually means when you understand the full story is enormous. And this weekend exposed that gap in a very clear way, because the people inside that garage understood exactly what Bubba Wallace was doing on pit road. They understood the history. They understood what Kyle Busch meant to him specifically. They were not debating it. They were focused on the same thing Wallace was, honoring a man who left an enormous mark on every corner of this sport and on many of the people who built careers inside it. As NASCAR now moves forward from what was genuinely one of the most emotionally heavy weekends in the sport's recent history, the legacy of Kyle Busch is going to keep surfacing in ways both expected and unexpected, in drivers who win races with his work ethic as their standard, in young competitors who got their chance through his organizations, in the number 8 sitting retired and waiting for Brexton Busch, in quiet moments on pit road before races that most of the world never fully understands. That is what real legacy looks like. Not just championships on a wall, not just win totals in a record book, but the fingerprints left on people and careers and lives throughout a sport that Kyle Busch spent 2 full decades making better, harder, and more competitive for everyone inside it. NASCAR Wire Report will keep covering every chapter of what comes next.